Hi, my name is Mirko Petricevic, and I'm a communication management professional living and working in Waterloo, Ontario, Canada. It's the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Neutral peoples. On behalf of IABC Waterloo, I'd like to welcome you to this video, which is a compilation of the 5-part webinar series called Upskill, which we presented in 2023 and 2024. During that series, we delved into every section of the IABC Gold Quill Awards work plan template. This video has 6 sections. The first being my introduction, my overview of the Gold Quill Awards program. And that's followed by 5 sections. For each section, we had a world-class communicator. Many of them were IABC fellows. I'm not going to introduce them here, but before each section, there'll be a QR code that leads you directly to the presenter's LinkedIn profile. There's a lot of detail, so I wouldn't recommend watching this video all in one sitting. So you might want to watch it section by section, maybe watch it in a group with colleagues or other members of your IABC chapter. Maybe watch it with people who are also preparing to submit a Gold Quill entry. However you choose to go through this video, I wish you all the best in creating a strong entry for Gold Quill Awards, and also in your ongoing upskilling and learning. Thank you. If you're watching this video, you already know that the Gold Quill Awards is the IABC's premier awards program, but it's structured also in the way that chapter and regional awards are structured. So watching this video will give you the same information that you need to strengthen your entry for chapter and regional awards as well. So the Gold Quill Awards has 4 divisions and more than 24 categories. So no matter what role you have in communications, there's usually a category that you can fit in one of your projects that you think is deserving of an award. Most categories consist of a work plan and a work sample. The work plan being the foundation of your entry, and the work sample being sort of the proof and the illustration of how you conducted your campaign. The work plan, being the foundation, is divided into 6 parts: business need and communication opportunity, stakeholder analysis, goals and objectives, solution overview, implementation and challenges, measurement and evaluation. As far as scoring is concerned, follows a scale, a 7-point scale. If your entry scores a 4, it's a competent piece of work, professionally sound and appropriate. To score higher and to score in the awards territory, you have to meet better than average scores in a number of different sections. In general, there are 2 types of awards: an award of merit, where your entry score is 5.25 to 5.74, or an award of excellence, where your entry score is 5.75 or above. 2 evaluators will go through a set of rubrics and all the criteria to decide on your scores. Now, why do I say evaluators versus judges? Because before we are assigned any entries to evaluate, we have to take an online module that coaches us into our approach. And the approach is that of a mentor, where they're more as a coach, a mentor, to help you improve the entry, strengthen the entry, and become a stronger communicator. In the training module, Dr. Amanda Hamilton Atwell says, you're not there to break hearts. No, we're not there to break hearts. We're there to be his mentors. Amanda is one of the presenters in the 2 of the sections that are in this video. Each entrant receives evaluators' tips for strengthening their work. Now, all of the rubrics and the rules are not a secret. They're there for everybody to see. Just go to iabc.com, go down to the awards tab here, scroll over the Gold Quill and how to enter, click on that. Scroll down to step 3, use the IABC resources, go to the division that you're entering, click on the entry guide, and you'll find the how-to guide for IABC awards. It's also known as the Midas Touch. There you'll find everything you need to strengthen your entry. So whether you're entering the Gold Quill, or regional awards, or chapter awards, from IABC Waterloo, we wish you all the best in strengthening your entry and for your ongoing upskilling. Now let's get started.
So let's get to the crux of what we want to talk about today, and that is the business need and opportunity. And as I've mentioned before, do not underestimate this section. This should be, in my mind, a minimum half a page to a full page of your 4 pages. And this really, in a nutshell, and I'm going to go in more detail, is why the business did this project. So reminder, you're thinking of it, there's a business, organization, nonprofit, association that you work for, and the communications is part of that business. But the business is here and the communications is serving that business and serving that business needs. So you need to understand the business you work for, why they do things they do and how they did it, and understand why the project you're doing contributes to that business bottom line. So at the end of the day, as the evaluator and as the entrant, you want to be able to draw the string in your story between the business need all the way to the end of the submission. And it really starts here. So this is, I'm going to delve a bit more, but this is the background. It's about using research to really make the case of why now and why this project. So this is not boilerplate. This is very specific to your organization, very specific to the project that you're going to talk about. But research really is the key. So again, if you're thinking about doing a project, you're at the beginning, you're talking about the business case, you're the senior communicator contributing to that senior table about why you're doing a project. The more you can find time, energy, money to do research will be key. This is where we're looking for the context to assess whether or not the communication solution meets the business need. If there's not enough relevant background information, there's no context, there's no environment described about the environment within which that organization operates, it's very hard for the evaluator to determine whether the strategy, the tactics you use were the right ones for the right audience if you don't understand that business case up front. The communicator has to understand the business that they're in, and that will come out in that communication need or the business need opportunity section if they understand the business that they're actually working in. But it's going to score well in this section if it solved the problem. So what was the need or the challenge or the spark or the turning point or the proverbial pivot that happened within the organization that communication solution was going to solve. So to fill a need, to leverage an opportunity. There needs to be kind of a why now, why this project. On here, there's either formal or informal research that influenced why you went in the direction you did on the communication side. So people often struggle on the research piece because they say, I don't have time. They don't want to make the time for it. We don't have the budget for it. If you're in a large organization, there may already be the research coming from a different department. So if you're, let's say, helping the HR department on a benefits, let's say, uptake on a benefits program, they've probably done the research. You don't need to do the research. Your client, your internal client has already done the research. Or there may be third-party research in the benefits world, in that example, that talks about, XYZ percentage of people that uptake on this benefits program. This is what it means for businesses. So don't be so stuck on, I have to do the research, I have to do it. It's only owned by the communicator. A reminder again, depending on the size of the organization, the breadth of the organization, there may be somebody who's already done it. And or if they're your client, you would hope that they would have done some research about the actual project they're doing before they say, help us solve this problem. Don't assume the evaluator knows anything about you, your organization, how it works. So the 5 W's will serve you well in terms of even the very first paragraph should talk about, this is what the organization does. We're a member-based credit union. This is how big we are. This is where we operate. This is how many members we have. This is what makes a credit union different from a bank. So even a couple of lines to kind of set the stage. Thinking you're going to fill a half a page to a full page here, you really want to set the stage. So talk about what the business does in the basic sense, but then you're going to keep drilling down. So what's the revenue? Like, what's the scale of business we're talking about? What sector are you actually in? Are you in the banking sector? Are you nonprofit, specific to healthcare, specific to hospitals, specific to palliative care. I mean, keep drilling down so I better understand the business that you're in. What products and services do you produce? Again, you don't need a laundry list, but list things that are relevant to the project you're going to talk about. So where are you in the business cycle? Are you a startup? Are you a legacy business? Have you been around a long time, but now something has happened to challenge that business? Are you expanding your business? Are you moving from one province to another? I mean, talk about all the things that you live day to day within your organization. And you already know, and often I find people don't include enough information here because it's already in their head and they just don't think to put down the obvious. And then talk about the location. So that could be physically where it's located and if it's relevant. So if you're in a prairie province and you're doing something related to, I don't know, a change in government in your province, that's going to be relevant. But let's say if you're online, if you're totally an online business or 90% is online, if that's where you operate, talk about that location as it relates to this particular project. And that also includes talking about the environment within which your organization operates. So are you the employer of choice? Are you with the XYZ business and you're the employer of choice? Or are you kind of one of the top three and you're the second and you really want to be that first? You're really vying to be that employer of choice for whatever reason that is. Is it a very thriving environment within which your sector or your business is operating? Is it struggling? I mean, talk about the business that your business is operating within. And then talk about who works there, who your customers are, or who your clients might be, if they might be patients. If you're for a hospital, for example, are we talking about one campus? How many people work there? Who are the customers? Is it a cancer care facility, for example? Do people come from all across the province, or are you very locally based? Again, if that's going to be relevant. And then talk about who your competitors are, back to that environment. Who else is operating within that environment? Again, if it's relevant, but you really do want to set the stage. Are you one of many, or are you the only one, or the only player in the proverbial game? The next W is the when. So think of all the whens that are relevant. So when did the company start? Again, is it a startup, been around a long time? When, let's say, did the current strategic plan or vision within which you're operating now, you're getting deeper and deeper within the organization. When did the current, let's say, strategic plan or vision, was it introduced to guide current projects? So what's kind of leading your organization? Where is somebody shining the spotlight? And is that new? Are you trying to get people on board with that? Or is this kind of business as usual for the last 3 to 4 years? So people are well on the way. They know the direction they're moving in. So why now? What has happened? What was the spark or the crisis or the need or the opportunity? So you'll know what it is within your organization. Did you get a new CEO? Was there a global pandemic? You're really struggling, let's say, to get employees to join your organization because of inflation. That's a spark, that's a turning point for you to then step in and help solve a problem. It's really about the drill down. This is point number 2, really drill down on the why. If you're putting things in there and you're thinking, well, why do we do this? Why do we do it now? Why do we do it this way? Those are the things you want to keep drilling down. So let's say it's an AGM. You do it every single year, but now you have a new CEO. That's the why now. Or, I don't know, your board was all let go and you have a new board. So that's a why now. So what has changed and what problem arose? So this is what you want to talk about. Tell me all about your organization, what you do, where you operate, and then talk about what's happened. What's the challenge that you're facing? And specifically, how did that change or challenge or crisis affect the business bottom line? This is often the missing piece. Don't tell me why you think the communication piece will be great. Why does that change matter to the business bottom line? Were you losing money? Were you losing employees? Employees weren't as efficient as they were before. Whatever that might be, it's all about why does that matter to the business bottom line? And then you're finally going to talk about where does communication come in? What's the opportunity that communication can help solve that particular problem, crisis, opportunity created by that change? So finally, in this section, you're going to describe, again, you're still within the business need or opportunity. You're going to describe the action you needed to take and why. But again, you're not going to drill down about we did this and we did this social media and we did this, in the first month or 6 months. You're going to talk about, in general, what you did. You launched a campaign. You did the rebrand, whatever the actual project is itself. The question is, to what end? I always ask the question, both as an entrant and evaluator, to what end are we doing the event? To what end are we getting awareness? We're getting awareness because we need to get more customers. We need more customers because we're losing revenue. We're losing revenue because inflation is impacting us. We're losing revenue because, there are 4 more competitors in the field. There are lots of reasons. So it's really the to what end question. And the key is to talk about what would happen if you didn't take the action. So you need to say, if we didn't do this, we wouldn't get the number of international students we needed to come to our university. Talk about, if you didn't do it now, what would happen? What would be the consequence of not doing it? And that then brings your business case full circle. Here's who we are, here's what we do, here's what the trigger was. And if we didn't do something, here's the bad thing that would happen, or here's something we didn't want to happen that may actually happen. This is a lot just to write this one section. And I would start with the one section and just do this one section. Again, allow for lots of time. So what I like to do is I'll write one section and I'll put it aside and I'll think about it. And then I'll remember something I should include. I might ask somebody either outside of my team. I'll talk about in a minute some tips, but ask somebody outside my organization to read it. And they'll start to poke holes and say, but I don't see the connection between here and here. But writing this first section hopefully will set you on the path for the other sections. I'm not going to say they'll easily write themselves, the other section, but this will really set the stage for you. So I would highly recommend going to the Gold Quill website. There's the template, there's samples there. There's this document called the Midas Touch, which is basically how to enter. It will tell you, include this in this section. So again, there are no secrets, but there's a lot of reading to do. So if you're at the musing stage, I would go to this document, for example, on the Midas Touch, and I would just kind of read it from beginning to end. It's a good read, easy read. And then you can decide whether or not you have the right project, the right time, the right resources, and the wherewithal to actually do it.
We wanted to start with the question, what is a stakeholder? And that's really your target audience, and that can be individuals or groups. And there's a lot of stakeholders out there.
There are really 2 approaches that you need to take to this. One is for your ongoing day-to-day communications, to know who your stakeholder audiences are that you're communicating with on an ongoing basis. And then there are the initiatives that emerge, the special communications, the one-time operations that require you to rethink it or to identify stakeholders in a different way than you have before. This past year here at Webcor, we introduced the second 5-year base camp of our 20-year strategic plan. I got the leadership to do a roadshow, and they take this out to every office and every project site, every construction job that we are doing. So the stakeholder analysis here is partly geographic, because we have the Northern California and Southern California divide. There are differences there, but there are also differences between people who work in the office and people who work out on the job site. So if we have a stakeholder trust is one of our key initiatives, one of the 4 in the base camp, how you build trust if you're out on a project site is going to be an entirely different conversation than how you build trust if you're working in an office in a support role. So we had to prepare the executive team to have this conversation and do this presentation differently on projects and in offices. So you do have your target audiences, as Priya has outlined here on this slide, and then you have individual groups of employees. Or individual groups of employees could be, so for example, a job title, project engineers, as we roll out a new communication tool where we're going to enable channels or communities. It would be a no-brainer to have a project engineer channel. This is an entry-level position. People coming out of college with an engineering degree start in construction as project engineers. They tend to be out on job sites, so they're isolated. They only get to talk to other project engineers on that project. And for them to be able to share questions and issues and ideas and just general observations with each other through a channel would be great. So we would identify them as a stakeholder group for this, but we would also maybe want to identify dog lovers if we had a channel called Dogs of Webcore. So how you break down your stakeholder groups is going to be different for specific initiatives than it is for your ongoing day-to-day communication.
And it really is about how well do you understand the audience that you're trying to influence. And it really, I think when we're evaluating, one of the things that tend to be an area of frustration when we're reading some of these entries is when people just say it's everyone, or it's this one size fits all approach, because our skill and our strategy comes from truly understanding the points of view of who we're trying to influence and impact.
Yeah.
And it's amazing to me as a consultant who goes out and does, audits and strategy for a lot of organizations, how many times I can walk into a new client or customer, and some of these are big multinationals. Like, this is not just the small mom and pop organizations. And I say, do you have a stakeholder analysis at your fingertips? Ask that of communication teams, and how very often, actually more often than not, they'll say no. They do not have something, because I think it's such a foundational document, to a starting point, if you will, to have available to you at your fingertips. So then when you're starting your planning on a project or a program, that you're able to immediately say, this is who this is targeted to, and understand the points of view of that audience and how to find them and how best to communicate to them.
Not every stakeholder group is equal. You are going to end up prioritizing them based on what it is that you're trying to achieve.
What you want to remember, and that's something that you need to put your kind of point of view and thinking around who's reading and who's evaluating your entry. Most often, they don't know your company. They don't know your business. They may not know your culture. They don't know your situation, your competitive environment, all of those things. So it's something to think about. Correct, Shel?
Oh, absolutely. You want in your entry, in the number of pages that you have available to you, to provide as much information by way of context for the evaluator. It can help them understand why you did what you did, and that could change the way they view it. I was also going to say that among stakeholders, I wouldn't rely on any kind of list that you might find somewhere. Your organization is going to have some unique ways to be sliced and diced. And it's also important to look at stakeholders who don't necessarily fit into a group other than influencers. Right. As you analyze your employee population, you will find that there are people that other employees go to when they have questions about how to get something done. There are people they go to when they want to figure out what's going on, and there are people that they go to when they want to figure out if they should believe what they just heard. And there are other ways to classify influencers in organization. I know Katie McCauley lists 7. I've seen a longer list, but those are the 3 basic ones for me. And sometimes when you're trying to get a message out, you want to identify who those influencers are. And at that level, what department they work for, their tenure in the organization, the other ways that you might categorize them just don't matter. The only question is this someone people go to when? So if you're rolling out new software, you want to communicate as a priority to those people that others go to when they want to get answers to questions about how things get done.
We wanted to talk a little bit about do's and don'ts. The stakeholder analysis, what we're looking for is how well do you define, segment, and analyze the critical characteristics of the audience in relation to the business need. And it's all connected. So we're going to talk a little bit about, let me start with a little bit of the do's. Be specific about your audience. We want to know how well you understand them in order to impact your strategy. Share those characteristics, demographics, that's, who they are, and in those areas that are relevant, the geographics, where they are, and psychographics. This is the one piece that I find people miss a lot, which is psychographics are the attitudes, opinions, and beliefs of the audience you're trying to impact and influence. So really, we want you to paint a picture of those audiences for us to understand how they actually impact the strategy and the tactics that you're going to implement in order to influence that audience. So we really want you to understand that. We want to know that you did some research, like where did you find the information and where did it come from? So it's not a guess, it's actually based on fact. And we're looking for that. And we want to know how, as I've mentioned a few times, that how does the evaluation of the audience impact how you approached the problem? What we do as communication professionals is provide communication solutions for real business problems. And that's the thinking that we want to see from you and hear from you and read from you when we're evaluating what you understand from a stakeholder perspective.
We had a question about how you identify the psychographics. And one of the key ways is something that was addressed earlier, and that's a survey. Ask. Survey focus groups. Another way would be to analyze the sentiment in as much of the online communication in your organization across your teams and Slack and email and whatever other tools that you're using for collaboration and communication. But a lot of organizations will do that as a big one-time undertaking and then update it down the road and then create profiles so that they know the psychographics of an admin in Northern California, for example.
And so many of you, for those of you who do a lot of change projects, there's something that we often talk about, which is a change readiness. And change readiness is either a survey or conversations that help you understand where people are and how they're going to react while you're going through changes. So really having that in change management, that's like a formal procedure. It doesn't have to be completely formal. It does help to do the surveys or the polls or the pulses or the focus groups or simple conversations with leaders and employees. But you can also find out an awful lot from the water cooler. And the people I would rely on, especially when you were with national or international organizations, are the admins who were in the know. How are people feeling? How did they react to this rumor? Where do you think they are? And having some of those informal conversations and relationships really help you understand how the audience, you become the expert on how the audience is going to react.
Yeah, so you've got qualitative and quantitative research are both valid when you're doing audience analysis.
Absolutely.
Don't say that your audience is everyone or general and fail to include the traits that are going to drive the strategy that you end up developing. It's rare that the audience is everyone. There's got to be a way to identify who, in a typical communication program and a strategy, you're going to be communicating with multiple audiences anyway, right? You're going to send a message or engage in a conversation with leaders and with managers and with supervisors and frontline people who are individual contributors. I mean, that's just one way to slice and dice, but each of them has a different role, right? You need leaders to be reinforcing all of this in the conversations that they have. You need managers to be interpreting the messages from the people at the leadership level who are issuing the broad communication messages. What does this really mean to us here where we work? And we're looking for the call to action among the front line along with everyone else. So, you know, it's important to understand the audiences and the characteristics that are going to determine what you're going to do with them. So for example, a characteristic of one of your stakeholder audiences may be that they don't read a lot. Again, I work for a construction company. We have hourly laborers out on project sites who they're not going to sit and read a long article. They don't have access to the internet. So that's going to drive the way we're going to communicate to them. We're going to have the foreman get our message across in a huddle in the morning, for example. So understanding these characteristics of your audience is really vital in driving how you're going to distribute, who you're going to distribute to, and in what way, what channel are you going to go through to reach them. That's based on those characteristics. So you have to determine which ones matter for this particular communication if you're going to develop a strategy that is going to produce the results that you are looking for. And don't guess or assume. I mean, I can go do a search right now and say, tell me the typical traits of a project engineer. And they'll probably be looking at construction companies that do different type of work than we do. Maybe one that does roads and tunnels. We do high rises and infrastructure type work, but not roads and tunnels. It could be different. It could be different if they're project engineers in the high tech world. You really need to go out to your audience and get the facts rather than make assumptions. That way you can tie your results back to the analysis that you did. And in your post-communication research, you'll be able to figure out where there were gaps, where we didn't get the message that we were trying to get across to a particular audience. What did we miss about them?
And I love the question that just came in from Mel about how can advisors or consultants convince busy, time-hungry clients to allow paid time for stakeholder analysis or other important contextual research. There's, if you, as a consultant, and I know Rochelle spent quite a long time as a consultant, one of the things I bake that time into my projects and my fees, because I know I need to understand the audience, especially when you're coming into various organizations. I want to build the success formula for you and your situation, not some generic one size fits all. And I usually talk to my clients about, I want to make sure that I'm setting you up for success. So first, that starts by identifying your goals and what you're trying to accomplish and achieve. The way I make you successful is to understand how we can influence that audience. And the question for you is, are we simply checking a box, or are we actually trying to influence behavior? And if we're simply checking a box, you get what you pay for. If we actually want to drive change that we're held accountable for, then let's talk. And I quite honestly choose the organizations and that I can impact change for.
When I was consulting, I found that I was explaining the concept of spray and pray to a lot of executives and making the point that, look, you're trying to move a needle here, right? You don't care how many views an article gets. You don't care about, you know, the outputs of the communication function. You care about the outcomes that affect the business and that drive your business plan and your business strategy. Spray and pray, which in public relations circles, most of you I'm sure know, means you're going to send a press release to every publication and media outlet out there and hope that one or two of them pick it up. Will it be the right one? Will it be the one that is going to reach the audience you're trying to reach? Well, this is why we find the publications and the journalists who write about the things or produce segments about the things that we need to convey. And then we reach out to them with an independently crafted custom pitch designed to appeal to them and their interests. That's the kind of analysis we need to do internally. Otherwise, we're just duplicating the spray and pray press release concept with employees.
We were on a big project with a US-based company, and when we were in front of the president of the organization talking about what did we want to accomplish and achieve, and talked beyond the outputs and started talking about outcomes and organizational impact, he started getting really, really excited about this project. And he's just hopping in and hopping out, but he, like, the way he walked out of that project meeting was incredible. And then it gave the leaders, the HR leaders that we're working with, this lift up to say we're on the right track. It was just really neat to see that happen. We start with 4. It's a 7-point scale. 4 is in the middle. But I want you to think about the fact that 4 is a competent, average way that most communication professionals will approach the situation. So we've got the basics to be a communication professional at a 4, and we score up and we score down from there. So we start with a 4 if you list the audiences, and there's more than one, that you understand some audience characteristics, and there's a connection between research and strategy, and we start seeing it as a competent approach by a communication professional. And the one thing I really love about the IABC Awards process is when you win an IABC award, you know you're not just delivering the stuff, you're actually best in class. You are doing better than the average communication professional. You are doing work that is innovative and like leading. And there's a real sense of pride, because I've entered plenty of awards where it's simply you get it done and they award everyone based on some very minimal criteria. It is tough, even if for me, I have won awards and I have not won awards, because I know when that global group is evaluating, they're evaluating on very high criteria. We start with 4, which is we go in with the best intent that what you're doing, what is being entered is a competent entry, that most communication professionals are there, and then we score up or down from there.
Yep, and the scoring is not arbitrary. It's not subjective. It is based on the rubric. So we're trying to make this as empirical a process as possible. You can see the 3 core elements here. Are you listing your audiences? Who's the primary, secondary, tertiary? We mentioned earlier that stakeholders are not all created equal, and you're going to prioritize them differently based on what you're trying to accomplish. How were those audience characteristics identified? I've worked here 25 years and I just know that's not a good answer, right? You need to let the evaluators know how you arrived at the characteristics that matter, which is how you end up tying the audience research to the strategy. I can identify hundreds of characteristics of a stakeholder audience that have absolutely no bearing on the communication. You need to narrow the characteristics to those that are relevant to the outcomes that you're trying to achieve. So we want to see that you've made a connection between the audience research that you've done and the strategy that you're implementing.
So we'll tend to mark down if the audience is not defined, if we just see lists, if there's the descriptions are too broad, they don't actually help us understand why you're doing what you're doing, that there's no analysis, and we'll look at it and say, you talked about several other audiences, because I see this a lot, Shell, that you may have only listed one or said everyone in the audience in the stakeholder analysis, but then as we're reading your present proposals and presentations and materials, we're like, here's all these other audiences you talked to and you didn't define them, or here's who you should have thought of and you forgot. And sometimes it's an audience you've mentioned and you've never mentioned them anywhere else in the proposal. So you want to focus on relevant. It's really important. And if there's things like you said, if it's vague or unsupported, we really don't want to see that. We want to know that you know what you're doing and you know the audience you're speaking with.
Yeah, we mark up above 4 if we do see that the research that you conducted defines relevant characteristics and needs of the stakeholders that have been identified as relevant to this strategy that you're implementing. How the audience linked to the strategy or the tactics. So was there a specific manager component, for example? Did you need to enlist executive support in a specific way, and what challenges and issues were related to the characteristics that you're able to identify with your executive team? The relevant factors that Priya covered earlier on demographics, geographics, and psychographics, and an explanation of how the audience research influenced the solution. That is, how did those characteristics of each of the stakeholders identified and prioritized influence the development of your strategy, and then the development of the tactics that would support the outcome that you're trying to achieve with that strategy.
What if you are a team of 1 and have limited resources? How do you achieve stakeholder analysis with these limitations?
Wow, as best you possibly can.
Yeah.
And I think you put that in the entry, that this is a team of 1. And our resources are limited, but I was able to do A, B, and C in order to analyze the stakeholder audiences. It doesn't cost anything to pull together a focus group that you manage. For example, you can do a poll on the intranet. There are ways that you can get to this. You don't have to do, what a Procter & Gamble would do.
And I'm going to challenge you to say, if you don't have a stakeholder analysis, do you have an award-winning entry? Do you have award-winning work if you don't know who your people are? And it may be prioritizing on the ones that do matter. You're not, we work on 100 things a year. I'm sure you've got a list of 100, right? What's the one?
Yeah, and go to human resources. They may have some stakeholder analysis that they don't know would be useful to you.
Now, what is very important for me, first of all, is that you need to distinguish between goal and objectives. The goal is the overarching statement, your dream. The objectives are the things that will enable you to achieve your goal. And the tactics are the things that you will use to achieve your objectives. And one of the things that the evaluators look at is, do you distinguish between output objectives, outcome objectives, and tactics? So remember that. And output objectives are things that you can count. It's important, but not as critical as outcome objectives. Outcome objectives are the measurements that really are going to add value to your project.
So what I would like to introduce to you is the Communication Value Circle framework. And for me, the value of this framework is that it will give you an indication of what you can measure. The foundation of this model is that communication professionals' main problem in many organizations, let me say that, is that they don't know how to prove the impact on the communication strategy. And the Gold Quill is essentially, how did we make an impact on the business strategy? So if we look at this model, then you can see that we impact on relationships because we create relationships. So think about the project that you want to enter. Is it related to relationships? Is it related to building trust? Is it related to creating legitimacy among stakeholders for this organization? Is it related to you creating business resilience for your leadership or communicating about innovation. So if we look at these 12 elements in the outside room, then these are the things that you would typically measure or do research on for your entry or for your project, because every project can be an entry, if you do it right. What I find very interesting is that communication professionals are very reluctant to, for instance, go for operational issues. And that is the area that we can actually prove our impact. Did you impact on the safety? Did you impact on productivity? Did you impact on absenteeism? The basic research is already available at HR. So if you want to easily prove your impact, we can go for the operational issues. Now, the next thing that I would like to show you is how we actually applied this model to a real project. In the past, that the organization participated in this very expensive trade show, and the report was more or less the AVE and what they had in the exhibition stand. So the business problem that we faced was the trade show was expensive and the executive team doubted its value. What we did, we applied the communication value circle. Now next to the next slide. We looked at the 4 quadrants of this model. So first of all, we looked at what extent did we impact on the sustainability of this organization, building the right relationships with the right people. We indicated to different people that they must target these people and they must actually talk to them. So we measured how many of these conversations did take place and what was the outcome of the conversations. Then we looked at impacting on the competitive advantage. It is the leaders, where we looked at the leaders. So we looked at the leaders that presented the papers, what they presented, and the feedback and the traction that they got on the social media to see how the conversation went further than just the exhibition or the trade show. Then we looked at building the intangible assets. So we looked at the brand visibility. We looked at the people recognizing the stand and comments about the stand and the social media sentiment about the stand and the exhibition and the company's presence at this trade show. Then we looked at with regard to the facilitating business results, we looked at the agreement signed, because that's one of the key focus areas of this trade show, is to get into contact with the right people and to sign agreements and to make business deals. So how many deals were actually signed and with who did they start to build relationships? So we briefed the delegates that attended the trade show beforehand, and we say, this is what we're going to measure and this is what we want feedback on from you. So you cannot decide that after the fact. You must brief them right from the start. And then additional measurements that we did was we used the results of the convention company to look at, what they research, and things like the most social responsible corporate citizens. They measured that, having the most innovative products and being industry leaders, being leaders in the market compared to brand and product, and they preferred companies to do business with. And you might see that these questions, which we suggested to the convention company, these questions were related to the 4 quadrants. So we made sure that we got the information that we actually needed. The last one was had the other results from the conference company, where we asked them to ask questions about is this company socially responsible, or ask it for all the companies. Which company do you feel is socially responsible, a leader in innovation, leader in industry, preferred company to do business with? And those were the results that we got. To conclude this, you can use the communication value circle to think about things that you can measure. And then when you do your project, think about how can you actually integrate this with your project when you eventually want to measure it. Over to you, Angela.
So how do we actually then connect that business goal with our communication objectives when we're trying to set them? So when I started out doing what I thought was strategic communication, is I found out what our company's strategy was, and I started writing my plan for here's the messages to tell people about the strategy and the channels I'm going to use. I just jumped from that company goal to telling people about the company goal. But that's actually not very strategic, because I wasn't necessarily contributing to help achieve the business goals. So what I figured out is I was missing some steps. You still have to start with a particular business goal that you believe your communications can support. But the first question we need to ask the leadership and think about ourselves is, in order for these goals to be reached, what needs to be different? Which groups of stakeholders need to do something differently? Because if nobody does anything differently, why are the goals magically going to be achieved? They're not. Unless the goal is to maintain the current status. So you really have to first identify who needs to do what differently, and set goals for that with your leadership. But now comes the part where some research will be very helpful, and we'll do a lot more on research in upskill number 5. But just you can do some soft research, you can talk to just a couple of people, you could do some focus groups, you can ask some questions online. But what you need to identify is, what is it that these people would need to know in order to do this behavior differently? And beyond knowledge, what attitudes do they need that will support this new voluntary behavior? I mean, if any of you are like me, a former smoker, I did not quit smoking the day I learned the knowledge that it was bad for my health. I knew that before I ever started. So it's all to do with attitude. Attitude for voluntary behaviors starts them or stops them. And luckily, I quit smoking more than 40 years ago now. So or 30 some years ago. So it's way in my past, and my attitude improved just in the nick of time. So we need to really figure out what is it that they need to know and or also to believe in order to support this new behavior. And once we can make that connection, that we actually did improve knowledge that they said they needed, and we did shift those attitudes that they said they would need to have in order to do the behavior, we can then also look at the behavior change. And now, and only now, are we truly ready to write some objectives for, so what are those right messages we need to get to people, and penetration of those messages, and which tactics should we be using that'll be most effective for those messages with those stakeholder groups. So I break this down into several different steps. When we categorize people or stakeholders in different groups, job role is really just one way of looking at it. But when you look at a particular business goal that you're trying to support, you really should step back and say, who are those different stakeholder groups who will need to do something differently in order for this goal to be achieved? And some of them might be internal groups, some of them will be external groups. Even if you're only responsible for internal or only responsible for external, you need to be aware of what your compatriots are doing on the other side. Otherwise, you're going to have mixed messages that are not going to help anyone's objectives or the business goal to be reached. But also, if you look in the bottom left corner sort of here of this circle, there's also a group of people that are not on your payroll. They're not employees, but they're really too close to your organization to consider outsiders. So for example, if you work in healthcare, this might be your volunteers, or it might be physicians who are not employed at the hospital, but they have staff privileges, or it could be family members. It just depends on the particular business goal you're trying to achieve. you have to think about those groups because there's very often nobody in charge of communicating with those sort of mixed groups that are neither purely internal nor external, but they might be really critical for a particular goal. So once you've identified the particular stakeholder group you want to start with, you need to do a grid for each major stakeholder group whose behaviors could really affect the achievement of this business goal. And so, as I said, the first thing we have to look at is the behavior. Identify how many people are doing something the current way, and then what is it that your goal would be to shift them to doing something differently? Or maybe it's doing the same thing, just do it more often or do it faster. But really identify what's going on now that's not helping us reach our goal and how would that look different? And a behavior needs to be something you can observe and count. So for example, somebody started working on this grid and their goal was to improve leadership communication. And that sounds like a nice behavior because it's an action verb, communicate. Except if you think about it, there are many different types of behaviors that might fall under that concept of leadership communication. It could be conducting better team meetings. It might be conducting more one-on-ones. It might be sending fewer emails. It could be any number of those things. Each of those specific things are behaviors. Communicate better is not a behavior. So you have to get to that level of something you can observe and count. And then once you've identified that, before we start planning the future communication campaign and objectives, we need to think about what is leading to that current state. So what is the knowledge that's out there currently, and through what channels is that coming? And what's the timing on that? For example, is that current knowledge something that people learned when they first were hired at the company and they learned in their training session? Okay, that's a one-time timing, and the training session was the channel. Or is this a policy? So if it's a policy, it's ongoing. Or in one case, we were trying to change the way salespeople sold, and it turned out that they weren't going to change the way they sold, no matter how well we communicated, until they changed their bonus plan, which continued to reward them for the old way of doing selling. So that's why we really need to uncover through some research what is leading to this current knowledge, whether it's correct or incorrect, and also what leads to those attitudes that they hold, that this is the right thing to be doing. And typically attitudes are influenced by other people or by their experiences of interacting with other people. So very often knowledge comes from something that's in a written or video form, and attitudes typically come from other people. So once we're asking our audience these questions about what current knowledge and attitudes they have and those sources for them, then we shift to saying, so if we wanted you to do this new behavior, what knowledge ideally would you need to have? And what would be a good channel to get that from? And then beyond knowledge, even if you knew everything you needed to know, is there anything underlying in your opinions or attitudes that might prevent you from taking this new behavior? And if so, who might influence your opinion to change it to a more positive direction? Your HR departments or your telecommunications department or your manufacturing department, they have all kinds of statistics on these behaviors. Because if they're important behaviors to your company, you can bet somebody's in charge of measuring it and improving it over time. But that audience research on the right messaging and channels is something that we need to take on ourselves. So if we do this, this will now tell us what are those right messages that we should be setting objectives for? What are the right channels that we should be setting objectives for? So now it really simplifies things, because if you are going to measure your eventual success, you're much more likely to have a very positive, successful result if you've done this research to identify what the right messaging is. Just as two quick examples. In one case, when I was working in the human resources communication business, we were having a problem with the way people were investing their money, their savings plan money. And we had people who were getting closer to retirement who were invested 100% in the company stock. And everything we'd written about was, no, you need to diversify as you get closer to retirement. You shouldn't be that heavily in stocks at all, and certainly not in just one stock. So we luckily did some focus groups because we needed to figure out what's wrong with our communication materials. How do we improve them so they get this knowledge message? Well, we very quickly learned in the focus groups that they completely understood what they should be doing with their investments, but they weren't doing it. Why? It was an attitude. The company had been going through some bad times, but they did not have any employee layoffs. They were very loyal to their employees. So these close to retirement employees wanted to demonstrate their loyalty back to the company by supporting the company stock. So no amount of knowledge messaging was going to change the way they behaved in the way they chose to make these investments. It was all to do with attitude. And this is why it's so invaluable to do this upfront research. Even if you talk to 10 people, you will know more than you did if you just blindly started writing your own objectives based on what you think you know. Okay, I'm going to send it back to Amanda to now talk about how do we actually write these measurable objectives and how does it connect to the business goal?
Thank you, Angela. For me, the one very important element to start is to write this overarching goal. Now, Angela mentioned the business problem that you're going to address. Now, the overarching goal is directly aligned with the business need or the business problem that you are addressing. So, this example that Angela just mentioned of the people investing in the organizations, the company's stock. So the business need they might want to address, the overarching goal was to change the behavior of employees with regard to investing their money. So that will be the overarching goal. It would be a statement. And you just get one goal. But then what is very important, the objectives that you set must support the goal. That must enable you to achieve the goal. So it must be stated in SMART terms. If it's not SMART, you're going to lose marks when the evaluators look at your entry. So the first type of objective is the output objectives. Now, the easy way to look at an output objective is it's something that you can count. You can put it on a table and you can count it. You can, it's a number, and it is easy to achieve output objectives. Unfortunately, it is not where the real impact is. What is more important is the outcome objective. That behavior that you want to change, that attitude that you want to change, that knowledge that you want to create, that would be your outcome objective. And that will usually be stated in a percentage. So you started at this level, and then you want to move it to that percentage. You started with 50% or 45% of the people knew something. After your campaign, you want it to be 85%. So you will always set a target, what it is at the moment, based on what you know about the situation, and then where you want it to be. Now, just a quick reminder of SMART: specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time frame.
I used to think this was easy. Now that I knew that it needed to be smart, I just had to make sure that I covered all those bases. But it became very difficult to actually write SMART objectives. Now, when I was back in grammar school, I used to love diagramming sentences. I may be strange, but I mean, most of us are word people. And so maybe you also love diagramming sentences. So what I did is I tried to break it down into what would be the structure of a SMART objective for communication. So I came down with there's got to be some kind of verb that indicates improvement, and it has to have an outcome of what is it that we're trying to improve, sort of an object of the verb there, a direct object. And then we needed to quantify that adverbially by an amount and also in time structure. So once I started with this kind of category of 4 different aspects of this SMART objective sentence, then I started looking at, well, what are my options under improve? Well, sometimes it's to increase something, like to increase the number of people who are investing their money properly in the tax advantage savings plan. Or it could be to decrease something. It could be decrease accidents of a certain type. Or if you're already at the level you want to be at, a very good objective is to maintain your high level, because there are many things that can knock you off that high level unless you're paying attention to them. So any of those types of verbs is a good place to start. So then what is it that we want to improve? Well, we can look at the messaging. We can, sometimes what we want to do is increase people's interest in a topic. If they don't think there's anything in it for them, they're going to be ignoring our messaging. So sometimes just increasing interest in a topic is important. I think far more than awareness. I once had a project where we had everyone aware of what the CEO wanted the vision of the company to be. The problem was, once we dug just a little bit deeper, they didn't understand how that was to be done. They thought it was 70% of them thought the way to do it was the wrong way. And only 30% of them actually knew the right way to get to that vision being achieved. So while there was almost a universal awareness of this message, the understanding of it was very low. So one thing is we can look at increasing the interest in an important topic that people aren't as interested in as we think they should be, or improving their understanding, their actual feeling of understanding a topic, or, which is a little different, the actual knowledge. In other words, you could do a true-false question or a multiple choice question where there is a right answer and several wrong answers. So you could track how many people actually know what they need to know as time goes on in your campaign. We can also set objectives for channels. A lot of these might be the output metrics that Amanda was talking about. In other words, like how many people, how many times did you send out a particular message? How much, what's the reading grade level of this material? So those might be the outputs. But if we're doing the right outputs, they are going to lead to the right outcomes. So this is also valuable to connect some of these outputs to these outcomes. So with channels, we might look at access. If we're using a particular channel heavily for our campaign, but 20% of our audience doesn't have any access to it, then we need to have a measurable objective for improving access to that channel so that that messaging can get through to those people so they can learn what they need to learn and then take those right behaviors. It's sort of a chain of evidence, step by step. How do we actually get them to do that? We have to make sure they've received some of these channels. Usefulness. If people don't think particular channels are useful and you're using them heavily, you're not going to get the best uptake of the messages in those channels. So you need to make sure you're improving those channels for the audiences that you're using them for. Or just the numbers of how many people are clicking on your newsletter stories, or how many people are attending your town halls or your trade show booths. And then finally, the behavior change. That we should be shooting for with anything that's a major change project. You are trying to change people's behavior. And a lot of these numbers are accessible through other people in your organization. So now that we know what we can measure, or what aspect of messaging or what aspect of channels are going to be really critical for this particular campaign, now we can look at by how much are we going to do this improvement? And this can be stated in different ways. It could be, well, let's say we don't currently know what the right level is. We're about to do some kind of research that'll tell us that baseline, but we know, we have a feeling it's not very good. So we might say, we want to improve it 10% over where we are right now. So then you will eventually find out what your level is now, and then you know what your new goal is. Or if you do know that percentage, you've got your old engagement survey or a customer satisfaction survey, you already have an actual percentage and you're not happy with it, you can say we want to shift it from 50% to 60%. Or with a lot of these output metrics, as Amanda mentioned, they might just be numbers. We want a certain number of people, of our audience, to click on something, attend a meeting, sign up for a program. Now, by a date, the time-based element can be also stated in different ways. It could be by a certain specific date, or it could be by the end of the year, or it could be within 12 months of when we start the campaign, or it could be just linked to another date that you don't yet know. So for example, I had a client who was moving into a new headquarters building, and she had her campaign built by within 1 month before we move in, all of these things need to happen. Within 2 weeks, these things need to happen. And then after the move in, within a month, these things need to happen. So they were tied to a date that we didn't quite know, because these things can change, but it was still time-based. It was linked to a particular point in time. So once we look at this as our list of options, we can sort of choose one from each column and assemble a very good SMART objective. We could say we want to increase understanding of our business goals by a certain amount, being, we now know that X% currently understand this business goal and we want to move it to another percentage. And we want to do this within 12 months because we're going to repeat this survey 12 months from now. So that's sort of how you can then pick and choose how you write each of your SMART objectives. Now, to show you how this actually played out, I have an example from a winning Gold Quill entry for a client of mine, where they were trying to improve leadership communication because they truly believe that it results in better business results. So their business goal, they had this was in 2017, and they had a business target of Vision 2020, certain targets that they wanted to reach as a business. And as I mentioned, they believed that better communication between leaders and employees can really help achieve that, which we demonstrated with a survey where we had identified that 83% of senior leaders and even a little bit more of employees said that effective communication does have a large positive impact on business performance. So we're showing this cause and effect relationship between the reaching business goals and using leadership communication to do it. We've established that cause and effect relationship. Now, in this section, most people typically write their measurable SMART objectives. But what I wanted to do was to make it more clear of that connection between the SMART objectives and the measurable results. Because I cannot tell you how many times I've been a Gold Quill evaluator, and I get to this section, I see some really beautifully written SMART objectives, measurable, time-based. And then I get to the results section, and they have some really beautiful measured results, but those two sections have nothing to do with each other. They had no measurable results for their actual objectives. They had no objectives for their actual measured results. So what I like to do is tell people, tell the evaluators in this section that we do have our goals and objectives quantified, but they're not in this section. They're going to be in the results section. So here in the left-hand column, I have what all of those objectives were. The second column is the target level that we've set. And the final column is the measurable results that we achieved. And if you see on the very top of that first column, it says objectives to be achieved by the end of 2017 as measured in the January 2018 survey. So I've got that time-based element applying to all of them without having to repeat it in every single one of them. So taking a look at this in a couple of different ways, some of these objectives were behavior related. So for example, they had set targets that every different leader of a certain level had 3 different minimum communication requirements that they had to achieve in the course of the year. And so that's very clear behavior. And our target was to make sure that at least half of leaders had that in place. And then the result, when we did the measurement of results, we had 3 different surveys, one for the leaders who were being supported with communication training and materials. We had one for the communicators who were supporting them, because this was a very large global company and there were hundreds of communicators around the world. And then one with employees talking about how communication with their leaders was actually going. So it was the communicators who were responsible for tracking how many of these minimum requirements each of their leaders that they supported were actually accomplishing. So they reported to us that actually 90% of them had a communication strategy, 90% of them were communicating goals, and only 77% actually had an annual communication plan. So there's behaviors then for each of these different stakeholder groups. There were some other objectives that were to do more with knowledge. So let's say under communicators now, that second row, we wanted to see how many of them said that the resources we were providing them with provided useful information that they could use in working with their leaders. So that's knowledge, the information that they're now going to be sharing with leaders. And again, we wanted about 50% of the comms team in this first year to actually be using it. And actually, depending on which resources we were talking about, they were currently being used by at least 67% of people. And some of them, pretty much virtually everyone was using some of these new tools. Then we also had some attitude objectives. So let's say, so let's take a look again at, let's look at employees. The first objective under there, the feeling, attitudes are feelings that their senior leaders have been communicating more often and better than they have in the past years. And if you look at the result here on the survey, 54% said that their leaders were communicating more than the past year, and 53% said that they were actually communicating better. We actually had a very similar objective for senior leaders. We asked them if they thought that in the past year they had communicated more frequently and better, and the numbers were only slightly higher than what employees said. So they were pretty self-aware of how well they were communicating. So all of this now, one of the aspects of a SMART goal is make it achievable. Some of you might be thinking that 50% is a low target. Well, for some of these things, what we're looking at is the number of people saying that things are improved over the past year. And this company, because we've been doing their regular communication surveys every couple of years, we're already at a very high level. So to get an improvement, to get 50% of people saying it's improved even more than the original high level was actually a pretty strong desire for improvement without being unachievable. Well, I think it could help us in getting some baselines of information. You know, if you want to see what is the average percentage of companies out there that are currently doing something or achieving something, I'm sure those kinds of numbers are out there, just like a regular search would. You can use AI for things like if you have a whole bunch of comments on your internal or external social media and you want to get a sense of the themes that are going on, AI can do that for you, can write a little report on what are the key themes in this body of content that you give them. So it can do some of that mechanical work for you.
AI, ChatGPT can actually reduce your the time you spend on qualitative research significantly. If you ask AI to, look at the trends and to, identify the views, what are the dominant views, and but what I like to do is to not go to AI to find the public domain information. I would do a Google search and I will search for specific sources, like what does a Harvard Business Review say about the effectiveness of safety communication? What are the standards? What are the benchmarks according to HBR? So for me, that type of research, I would go to Google and do a literature research there, and not AI.
So we're coming to you today from the lands of the Wurundjeri, Woiwurrung and the Bunurong people in Melbourne, Australia, and we pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. So combined, Jonathan and I have evaluated IABC Gold Quill Awards for almost 20 years. And that sounds like such a long time, and it is. And we genuinely love doing this. It's one of the ways that we can give back to the profession, but we also learn ourselves. So it's PD for us as much as it is for the entrants. And we've seen some amazing work that the comms professionals who've entered are deservedly proud of. It makes an impact. It's really well considered. It's informed by insights, smart, innovative, and it delivers business results, and it meets the global standard. Now, the entry and evaluation processes are really quite rigorous, and this is what makes the IABC Gold Quill Awards stand apart from other industry awards. And it's also, that applies to the silver leaf because it is based on the gold quill. So we've also seen entries that are not quite there yet. The evaluators on the blue ribbon panels take time to provide that constructive feedback, as Mirko said, so that the entrants can learn and do better next time. And the intention is to do better next time. And I do know of folks who failed to win an award one year, then they took on the feedback and they returned the next year to win the best of the best award, which is quite a feat. So well over 6.4, I think, out of the 7, which is quite an amazing score. So today, as Mirko said, we're going to be focusing on 2 sections of the work plan at once: solution, implementation and challenges. And we'll share what we've learned from our experience. It'll be the great stuff as well as the not so great stuff. So you'll hear us talk about the warts as well. Can you flick to the next slide, please? Awesome. So the first section is what makes a great solution great. So what is it that we see that we think, yes, that's just amazing, it's perfect, we're genuinely loving reading this entry. Now, one of the things that I'm really passionate about is alignment, and this is where we see all of the first 3 sections that Mirko talked about really work well together. So when we're looking at that solution overview, we're looking at, is it aligned to the business need? Is it aligned to the stakeholder analysis? Is it aligned to SMART objectives? And if you've not done the work in those first 3 sections, section 4 is going to be terribly difficult for you to score well in. So it really is about being clear and showing how it all is woven together. When Jonathan and I were talking about this in preparation, Jonathan said, this is where the rubber hits the road. And I think that's really true. Jonathan, did you want to add to that comment?
Yeah, I think that's very true. It's the obviously the heart. It's the bit that everyone wants to read forward to. Is like, what did they do? What happened? But if that work up front isn't there, it's going to be very difficult. This is where these sections need to be, that we are really seeing that connection back to the actual business need and the objectives, and it becomes very hard to demonstrate a great solution if the objectives are out of alignment, or if the business need hasn't been identified clearly to begin with. So, but having said that, I think what makes them great, we were discussing this because we've come off the back a couple of weeks ago of doing the panel judging here in Asia Pacific, and what makes the solution great is where it does leap out as the story is there. The story, you can see the story of what problem is being solved, and you can see the approach that's been taken to developing that. And we'll talk through some of the features of that in terms of it, but it's certainly where you can see a holistic sense of what is the overall approach to the problem. It's been informed by the context, and it addresses that key business need. If that's a gap to begin with, it's very hard to overcome that gap. And design with the outcome in mind. So we want to see the solution that is going to move that dial, move that needle. To Andrew's comments, it's where's the behaviour change, where's the perception change, where is the outcome as well. And great solutions can illustrate that.
Yeah, and it's also, what else you see is you see the strategic thinking that's leading to this solution, and strategic thinking is underpinned by insight. So that there is an insight that they've identified earlier, and they've brought that into the solution. It informs how they approach it, and it becomes really clear that things like their messaging shows that it's aligned back through to the stakeholder analysis. So you've also got you can see that they're thinking innovatively as well. So it's not just about doing something that's fairly stock standard. It's about taking it up to that next level, that next notch. How can you challenge yourself? How can you think a bit differently? And the other aspect that's here is also a high level overview of the tactics with time frame, that sort of thing thrown into it. It's important to then point us to the work sample where you can get more of the detail, but don't rely on the work sample to do your heavy lifting for the solution, because that doesn't score well, because we're not going to go searching for it in the sample unless it's already talked about in the work plan. I think that's really important to do.
Sorry, I was just going to add to that, Zora. I think that's a great point in terms of it's the bit that wants to make you read ahead and wants to make you as an evaluator dive into the work sample. Sometimes it's the bit that you see, okay, I really hear what they've thought through here and how they've devised this solution. Now I'm excited to see what it actually is. I think there's that component that comes across in the ones that are often great or exciting.
And you can feel the energy. It's jumping off the page at you. You can see the effort and the smarts that have been put into it. Do you want to flick to the next slide?
Yes, certainly. So that's the solution design component. And then we want to see what makes implementation effective? And that's this is the managing communication component. This is communication management. How is that solution being managed through to its outcome? So we here the things that make this section effective is all of those aspects in terms of time, resources, design, engagement, governance, the kind of things that are feeding through to being able to deliver the concept through to execution. And I think within that feedback point, so how has the program or how has the solution actually hit the road? If it is where the rubber hits the road, what's happening in terms of driving that vehicle to get there? And so I think this is also where the implementation doesn't have to necessarily be a good news story, but we want to see, and we'll talk to challenges in a moment, we want to see what hasn't worked, but this is the bit where I think there's a lot of the case study learnings that other people, when they look at Gold Quill entries, how can they avoid the traps, or how can they avoid the things that have been difficult along the way? There's a few things here where we definitely need, in evaluating, unless there is budgetary information and resourcing information of some form that can give an indication of the constraints around considering the solution, the thoughts in terms of how to actually manage a rollout and manage the implementation itself. It becomes very hard to say this is an effective implementation without those components. So we do want to see at least high-level milestones and so on within that section. I think the other piece here is if you can do a find and replace on your solution for a different organization and it works, it's probably not unique or different enough. So the implementation component and challenges is all of those things that make it unique to the environment that you're in. So it might be overcoming stakeholder opposition. It might be having to engage an oppositional leadership team. It might be recognizing that there are significant constraints in terms of resourcing or team size. And when we say the whole team worked on it, well, we want to see more than that. We want to see what were the roles and functions within that and how were things developed. There was a great example from the recent judging where one particular solution, it was absolutely fantastic, but then a large part of what was being delivered by other functions within the business, and there was no component of discussing how they were engaged. So and how they were managing that interplay between the central comms team and the other teams that were developing. That's an example of where that's essential information about the implementation in order to be able to say, you know, how did you overcome that bridge, or how did that relationship work? That's just one example. Zora, do you have any other examples of that kind of level of detail?
Look, you know, one of the things that I was thinking of for this, it reminds me of many years ago when I know we've got people here from New South Wales government, and I did work for New South Wales government at one point. And the head of strategy in a leadership sort of training workshop said to me, proper planning prevents poor performance, the 5 Ps. And I think that really applies to this. So, you know, if you do the planning really well, you can overcome a lot of potential challenges. So, you know, and the alignment person in me says, okay, the misalignment happens when strategy and execution aren't working well together. And normally the biggest issue is clarity and shared understanding. If you don't have that, it's not going to work. So do you genuinely understand the strategy? Do the people that you need to support you, so in the case of the other people who are executing, do they genuinely understand the strategy? Do they know what they're supposed to be doing? Have you got all the right people on board? So have you got that executive sponsorship? Have you got the stakeholder buy-in? All that sort of stuff. And the other aspect I think that's really important is to have that benchmarking piece, and then evaluate as you're going through the program, so you can see if something's not working, what are you going to do? How are you going to adapt? How are you going to change? Those sorts of things are really important. And if that's articulated, if that's what you're going through and you're articulating it, that's fantastic. We love to see that. That's what will help the implementation be much more effective.
I think that's a really good set of things to consider within that. I think we've summarised some of these are out of the how-to. Some of these are our own list of what were the things that we definitely wanted people to think about on the way through it. But to just drilling up from this for a moment, I think Zora's kind of nailed it in a sense that what we're looking for is a story of what was done and how well it was done and why that story worked. And that's something that in developing the work plan itself, we want it to be a compelling narrative on the way through that. We want to see, what was the problem? One day it was like this, then this happened, then this happened, then we've been able to do this, and now this is the result. And so the solution is really the gut of that story. In story structure, it's like the big act 2 of what's really going on. It's where all the hard yards happen and people are chasing that objective. But in terms of looking at the things that are excellent, see a description and you go, oh, okay, I really see how that's happening. It is aligned with both all three elements: the need, the audience, and those objectives within there. That it is informed by research. What I don't mean within this is a solution something that can be a set and repeat, and what can be applied. I think the learnings from every solution, there's always learnings that can be taken forward. The specific one in this means more so, too often we see communication programs that they're focused on go live and maybe a little bit after go live. But for example, if it's a project or if it's an implementation, what's going to happen a year on? What are the communication things that are going to sustain feedback with a program? If that's not necessarily owned by the communication function or elsewhere, has the solution taken into account the fact that post go live can sometimes be a year or 2 years, and what's happening within that, and has that been considered within the solution? Every time we do this, we're learning. Every time we do a communication program, we're always learning from it and which bits of that can be done. But I think the fact that a great solution goes to a specific business need, the absolute specifics of the audience and so on, these should never be find and replace, change out the situation and then be able to do it. Having said that, great approaches, what from that can we learn and take? And that's part of what comes out of the Quill process, is that we see, wow, that was a really smart approach. What could we use in our environment if it matches the business need and if it matches? So that's the other sustainable, I guess, in that sense. So if it was a long-term, say it's a health management program that's not going to have full results in 1 year, but that there's going to be ongoing stakeholder engagement and other things beyond that, has that been built into the solution design, for example? So what's going to happen with audience feedback or audience changing needs in year 2 or year 3 of something? Has that been built into the process? So yeah, so these are some of the things that leap things up from a baseline to that next level up. Has design thinking been used? I know we've got somebody from the New South Wales Public Service Commission online. They've done some really innovative work, for example, which they had some previous Quill success with around user-centered design and so on in different communication solutions. So it's that where is the edginess? Where are the different things that have been brought into this solution that are going to make it unique to that setting? Those solutions that excel hit some of those. But what Zora and I found on the way through thinking about this was that much more than the solution, some of the challenge. So I think there's almost more to talk about the problems or what to avoid in putting these together. So what do you think, Zora?
Thank you. I do have photos of me all muddy because I have done Tough Mudder. So, yes, it could be me in those photos. When I think about the challenges, I'm thinking about, what are those? Have they identified what their thinking was at the beginning of the process? Did they do a session at the start where they were thinking about what could be our potential issues, blockers, and who are the difficult stakeholders to consider? Just yesterday I was meeting with a client and doing this kickoff session and talking about exactly those points with them, because you know, we need to know what could potentially become a roadblock. We need to know how people think, how some of the stakeholders think, what do they think, feel and do, so we can, you know, shift it if we need to. How do we make sure we get the right support on board? All those sorts of things. Have they potentially thought about doing a pre-mortem? So, you know, we normally do a post-mortem or a review after a project to learn about what are the things that went well, what are the things that didn't go well, what can we take further, et cetera, et cetera. But how about doing something that's a pre-mortem so we can identify those potential issues? And we know that as comms professionals, we're really good at issues management and crisis, and we can plan for that. So has that sort of work been done? All of that sort of thing would be amazing to see in this section in the challenges. But what we generally see is, you know, there might be a number of challenges identified, and they've sort of briefly identified what they are and told us perhaps what they've done. The ones that are really good are the ones who've gone and explained it fully. And as Jonathan said before, you know, they've identified resourcing. They've identified, and that's not just in terms of there are so many people involved in this project, but also what sort of time is that taking for them? Is it like 100% of their focus, 20% of their focus, whatever it is over X period of time? From a budget perspective, if we don't have the context, if we don't understand the context that was explained earlier, we're not, you know, we're going to be looking, and if they've told us a budget, we're going to be going, well, that's a really small budget, or that's a high, you know, we're not going to have anything to evaluate that on. So is it a reasonable budget? Do we know if it's a reasonable budget? Or have they really told us everything? Because seriously, that can't be achieved for that sort of money, or they're just incredible at what they're doing. What are those external factors that have sort of surprised them and come out of left field? You know, you could have some sort of, it could be geopolitical issues, it could be, you know, social justice issues, all sorts of different things that are now coming to that come to the fore a lot of the time and make us have to adapt or change path somewhat. Of those things being identified. Did you want to add anything else, Jonathan?
No, I think there's, I mean, there's, as you mentioned, there's usually specific kinds of roadblocks or things that people hit. I think this goes to the excellence piece as well. I think increasingly we're seeing organisations re-understanding the role of organisational listening and feedback along the way. So I think what stands out is where if an organisation is actually not doing a set and forget with a communication plan until measurement, but that there's points in time where there's some kind of evaluation or further feedback to act. I think that starts to identify challenges in a way that otherwise may not be surfaced. So usually there's kind of a bit of a mark up for incremental awareness of impact and ongoing measurement, not just at the end of this program did we meet our objectives. So yeah, I think that's an area where
I think the organizational listening is really important, and making sure that you've got that feedback loop happening. The other point I was just going to make before we go to the next slide is that around the stakeholders, the involvement of the stakeholders, the consultation, the engagement. You know, if you've invested time into your stakeholder relationships beforehand, the challenges are going to be so much easier to address. So, right, you know, that's one thing that helps meet challenges, is if you've got those strong stakeholder relationships to start with.
The only other thing I'd add just before we move to the next, just one more in that one is, you know, where something is a even for a small implementation or a small change, but particularly for larger strategies, is there SWOT, you know, have people done that work up front in terms of the organisational business need? Has there been a SWOT analysis or a pest analysis, things that feed into that understanding of what the risks may be in advance? That's certainly one way to manage and overcome those challenges along the way. Communication's a risk management function after all, more often than not. So have those risks been managed?
I'm just going to do the warts thing. Every single year, we just shake our heads and say, did they not read the Midas Touch or the how-to guide. So we genuinely, when we're evaluating entries, we genuinely want to give them the best score possible. We try so hard to give them the best score possible. And the Midas Touch tells you exactly how it's being evaluated. The rubric can tell you exactly, you know, what you would get for a 4, what would you get for a 5, what do you need to do for each of those to get those scores. And it tells you, you know, what you're going to be scored up for, what you're going to be scored down for. So inevitably, there are a lot that don't achieve over the 5.25 or 5.75. And it's because they haven't addressed the key points that are in this guide. So I'm not going to go through every bullet point, but I'm just trying to highlight the fact that from a solution perspective, you know, the things that we've already talked about in terms of that alignment, the innovation, the high level tactical sort of implementation, the stakeholder engagement piece, the messaging, the insights, all of that needs to be there and link it through to the work sample. If you haven't done that, you're just not going to get the score. It's just not possible for us to give you the score, and we'll provide you that information in the feedback. So Jonathan, you can take the next one.
Yeah, very similar for implementation and challenges. It's like the note I've got myself here is the rubric really is everything. And, you know, there is a roadmap for what good is going to look like with this. You know, what does stand out is when people have tried to retrofit their work plan to a solution at it's come to awards time and then you've done it. But the reason that this is based around excellence is and the quills have been based around excellence is these are all practices and approaches which are things that lead to the demonstrated outcomes at the end. So following that roadmap, even at the point in time of starting your communication planning, following, you know, the how-to guide isn't just a how-to guide for the awards. It's really a pretty good playbook for ensuring that you're developing your communication plan and solution from the start with all of those things in mind. So when it comes, again, I won't talk to the bullet points because they are in the how-to guide, but you know, there's a couple of ones here that are worth pointing out. The number of things that don't adequately cover budget or resource information where it's in any way useful for us to be able to evaluate is honestly, even out of 6 recent entries, I can think of 3 that just didn't do an adequate job on that. And they would have been points straight away that people could have had a better piece on. And just that a miracle occurred is not a good enough implementation story. You know, we need to know, you know, we did these things and then suddenly we got to the measurement piece. We need to know, we need to see what that effort and that thing is. It's not enough to say that we did these things. Did I mention budgets and resourcing? Yes, I did. I'm going to mention it again. Budgets and resourcing are a really key part of this. And as I said, I did mention this before, but if the plan works as a find and replace for another organisation, it's probably not articulated well enough, and it's probably an indication that the work around stakeholder objective and business need in the first place hasn't been done in order for the solution and the implementation to be specific to the situation. And that's a really core piece. You can't retrofit that. And an example of that, actually, I'll jump feeds really neatly into this theme. But I'll start with this and I'll hand back to Zora. But one of the places where people mess up is, and this happens sometimes with consultancies or organisations that are helping other organisations. If the solution is implementing the thing that you're implementing and it looks like it could have been done in any other setting with no factors according to the, you know, the uniqueness of the setting, the uniqueness of the stakeholders, the specific requirements of the organisation, if it looks like it's a solution that could be airlifted in anywhere, it's probably never going to be a excellence award, because it's a set and forget kind of communication. That's where we create noise in organisations rather than create solutions. So that's a really big area where people mess up, as you can tell when the intern or the junior or the person on their development path within the team has been tasked with trying to create an award entry out of something that's been done that they've had good feedback about, but those other things haven't been done along the way. They stand out. You cannot mask that in the process. So That's the biggest area I think people mess up. But I'm going to hand to Zora for a couple of other examples in there.
I think, you know, there's the other elements of really not demonstrating the messages in the solution development, and if they're not linking those specifically to the audiences and channels, so they're not showing that. The other piece that really can be irksome is if the solution isn't informed by insight, so it's not considered and not thought through. And the bugbearer is, and I mentioned it earlier before, is if you're relying on your work sample to do your heavy lifting for you because you found it too hard to try and put everything into 4 pages. It can be done. Lots of people do it. So it's a matter of trying to be concise and really clear with what you put in the actual work plan, which is really, really important.
So this is really just a little bit more of a shopping list of things to avoid. This was another bugbear, no simple representation of the implementation plan. By all means include some detail of the implementation plan in the work sample, but we need to see at least a sense of phases or timelines and some roles and responsibilities described within that work plan itself.
And the other point with that is your overview of your tactics, and the implementation is actually in the solution overview, and your issues in dealing with the implementation is in section 5. Just a point to look at. Next one's yours.
Yeah, well, that leads in quite well to, I guess, this really comes back to solution rather than challenge. But my massive bugbear is around tactics that just don't match, or approaches that just don't match the type of change or the type of goal that's within there. And I have literally seen entries that have, you know, some sort of transformational goal, but the only channels being used are email or newsletters or other things, and that is just never going to fly, because we know that different channels achieve different things. We know that we can't achieve real engagement or real transformation with channels that are just going to be push or self-service within there. So this is one where this is more a bugbear around the general state of communication planning necessarily than the entries themselves. But we do see entries where there's just no real thought of will the things that we're doing actually move that dial, and have they been appropriately chosen for it. It's an area where we would think that it stresses me out that it's still an issue. Because I say, if people are at the stage of entering an award for a piece of work, the correct, you know, choosing methods for change should be a little bit further advanced than they sometimes are. People have lots of bugbears rather than the flip side of that is where we start to see innovative solutions and things that haven't been done before, or new approaches. You had a great example when we were talking about this, Zora, to begin with, of a kind of breakout solution.
Oh yes, I was doing the kickoff session at the beginning of a campaign which was all about behaviour change in the health system, and ran the kickoff session with all the various people who impact the program in the room, and asked them, you know, what does success look like? And you got a variety of answers, which is always interesting. And, you know, you need to bring them together to make sure that we can get a common goal in that. And then when it came to, and what do we want to achieve here? And I got motherhood statements. And then I was just like, okay, I'm sorry, that doesn't work. We need real objectives. What are they? What are they going to do? And how we're going to measure them. And I remember in one particular situation, one person said, we're comms, we can't be held accountable for this. And I just thought, yeah, no, that doesn't work. And after that, one of the key people in that room then asked me to mentor her, and she eventually, became an SCMP. So, because that was just very common, people just avoid doing that thinking at the beginning. And I'm conscious of time, so we should keep going.
Yep, we'll move on. I guess the transition from the other method selection, obviously we see a lot of technology solutions in the solution space, in the methods space. We are in an industry which is very hammered by technology and vendors, and rarely is a tech solution on its own going to be a solution in its own right. But we do see submissions where it's clear that perhaps maybe the internet vendor or somebody else has put a lot of effort into talking about why that solution is the solution, but they do tend to be in the motherhoody space. And the other thing that we don't want to hand over our solutions to is necessarily the AI space. That was my graphic from asking Dali to create an image of an unemployed communication professional sitting on a park bench feeding robot pigeons. We can ask AI to do some things for us, but we can't ask it to either write our quill entries, and we certainly can't rely on it solely for things. But Zora, do you want to talk a little bit about the where things are in place?
I just want to make the point, and I have been on the ethics committee as well as lots of other committees, but there are times that some of the solutions or some of the approaches that are put forward in quills are questionable from an ethics perspective. And we're going to be using AI more and more and more, which is just a given, I think. We need to make sure that we're really clear, we're transparent about it, and point that out in the entry, and make sure that it's responsible and ethical use of AI. And IABC has recently put out its IABC AI principles as a guide. They're not rules, they're just a guide. But it's good to get across that and make sure that you're incorporating that approach when you're looking at your work and what you're entering into the quills.
This is the section where most people lose the most marks because they just don't understand how to prove the impact of their projects. So, you can tell the most beautiful story, you can have the most amazing work plan and work sample, but if you don't measure and evaluate your project effectively and in a credible way, then you're going to lose a lot of marks. The rubric, as Mirko mentioned, you will find it in your resource document. Very important. The key concepts in the rubric, first of all, is thorough and insightful explanation of the measurement. So the evaluator need to understand what you did. You need to include the methodologies that you used, because we need to understand it's not just management that liked it. It is a critical, a valid and reliable method that you used. Sometimes some people only include one measurement instrument, which for me personally is fine because it depends on what you want to achieve and what you want to prove. But according to the rubric, you could include more than one measurement method. But what is the most important thing is that this measurement of yours must be thorough, it must be valid. The evaluators must see that you really measured something that was critical to the business need. Remember, look at the key concepts in the rubric. And what I always prefer or recommend is that you work your way backwards from 7 and make sure that you have everything that's listed in 7. Make sure that you have everything that's listed in 6. Make sure that you have everything that's listed in 5. And then 4 and the rest should be there by the time that you get to 4. So, but check yourself against the rubric. That's why it is there. For me, this is so critical because I always feel so sorry for the people, the entrants, when you get to the SMART objectives and you realize that they just didn't formulate the objectives in the right way. And so, you know, when you do your entry, and even if you do a project, intervention, plan an intervention, print this out, paste it on your notice board, look at it constantly when you do this work, because this will impress management if they can see that you really thought about every part of this process. And as Angela mentioned, the three concepts, research, measurement, and evaluation. What is the difference? Research, in essence, is the broad process of gathering information to understand the topic or the issue, guiding the development and the refinement of your communication strategy. So this is the broad process. The next one is measurement. Measurement is, in essence, about quantifying specific aspects of communication activities to understand their scope, impact, and using numerical data. The most important one is evaluation, because this involves assessing the effectiveness of your communication. When you develop your project, you do research because you need to get the context to understand what you're working with. When you once a campaign is planned and the interventions are initiated, you would probably do measurement, and then when you want to determine the impact, you will do evaluation. And so what can be measured? The process, activities, and outcomes. Now, process, you will typically not include in your communication entry for a call. But I just felt that it is important that as communication professionals, we sometimes do look at our processes and we look at internal efficiencies, look at how long does it take you to do certain things and see if you can improve those processes. But remember, that will just tell you that you do things right. It will not tell you that you're doing the right things. Very important. Outputs are the things that you can count. It is the number of how many people attended an event, how many shares were there, how many views were there. It's a raw scale and it's important to do, but it will not impress your management. What will impress the management is the outcomes. And that will be determined by what you spend your time on as an advocacy organization, as a non-professional, as a business organization. And these would be the key things that you need to measure. If I can, put it on a scale, I would say output objectives would, for me, weigh about 30% and outcome objectives about 70%. So we need to focus on outcome objectives, but it's more difficult to measure than output objectives.
So just
Angela,
putting that
over to you.
So just putting
Yeah.
that together, outcomes are the most important thing to measure. Things like, did you change how much people understand something? Did you improve their attitudes? Did you actually change their behaviors? But those things are measured less frequently. So if you could just sort of put all the builds up, thank you. So the first thing you want to know is with these outcomes, you can only measure them infrequently, maybe a survey once a year or at the end of the project. But along the way, you need to know, am I doing the right things that will lead to that outcome? So for example, if you want people to understand a particular topic better, some of the activities or those outputs that we can measure along the way, starting from the right, is, well, did we actually give them enough content? If you don't give any more content on a topic, please do not expect a better survey result at the end of the year. Similarly, are you using the right channels for those messages? Different audiences prefer using different channels or have access to different channels. So you have to make sure that you can track that along the way. And the final thing is you can send out a lot of content, but if you've written it at a grade level above the capability of their understanding it, that's not going to improve their understanding. So those three examples of outputs are things we can measure that will lead to the outcome. And so then when you put them in your write-up, you show that you were tracking these things along the way to make sure you did get the better outcome at the end. So they're related, they're important, but you can't just stop with the output measurers. You have to get to the outcomes.
Yeah. Okay, so let's look at the different types of data that you can use for your measurement and your evaluation. First of all, we get secondary data. These are things that's already there. And then we get primary data, and that's things that you need to do. So if we first look at secondary data, you know, there is a lot of information in an organization available for you as a communication professional to use and to really contribute to the business. For instance, safety statistics. If you want to run a campaign on improving the safety in an organization or improve the productivity in an organization, you have these numbers available, or HR statistics like absenteeism, like a specific mental wellness program, and you go and you look at what's available in your HR department on an issue like that, that is related to your employees. Because that will, if you can prove that you actually reduced, made an impact on these statistics, you know, you will really indicate that as a communication professional, you add value to the business. If we look at the external secondary data, these are things that syndicated research that you can buy into a bigger research project, and the research organization will provide you with just your little bit of information or compare it to the other organizations involved in it. It can be pooled research where people will have one big survey, and then all the contributors to the survey will get access to all the information, but granulated just for their specific organization would they want to, but also see what the other organizations, without knowing who scored what, but what the responses or the level of performance were. And then public domain information. There's a lot of public domain information, especially on, you know, if you want to benchmark on something, you can actually search, but make sure that you use a credible organization benchmark if you want to use public domain information. Then primary research, in other words, the type of research that you need to do yourself. First of all, we have oral methods, we have questionnaires, which we all know, observation and content analysis. If we look at the oral methods, I'm going to go into a little bit more detail just now. We get structured interviews, we get listening groups. It used to be called focus groups. Nowadays, we call it listening groups. We have questionnaires, which can be online and paper-based. Paper-based still because some people do not have access to a computer, so they need to do a paper-based. And observations, that's for events and movement around communication elements. And then content analysis, you know, do the people really understand what you're saying? And are you using the right channel, and are they really paying attention to what you say? So if we look at, first of all, two important words, reliability and validity. If I put a watch, I take a watch and I put it an hour ahead of time, it will still be valid to keep time. So it will measure what it says. It will measure time, but it will not give you reliable time. So you need to, reliability implies that different people can use the same instrument and it will give them the same type of result. So it would not be if I use an instrument and Angela uses an instrument and we test the same group at the same time, we must get similar results. If a sample differs, it will definitely, you know, we might get different responses levels, but overall it must be the same. So your research must be reliable and valid. Then in interpreting qualitative results, it is just remember that it should be valid and it should be reliable. And if you are going to use it in your call entry, indicate how you interpreted it and indicate the percentage of the people that said something, and then the change in the perception, the percentage of the people that said something. It is, you can quantify qualitative research as much as you can quantify quantitative research. So questionnaires, we know them very well. We use them often. Very important. You must ask the questions that will convince management that your project had an impact. Be very careful not to have long questionnaires. I prefer shorter questionnaires to get more depth answers to questions than to have long questionnaires and people don't answer your question. The coding page or the demographic page, very important, because that will enable you to granulate your data. But on that page, you will ask the typically the things that you have in your stakeholder analysis, you will granulate according to those. But I never use more than 5 elements on my coding page, because then people get very sensitive about what you want to do with it. So rather have less elements on your coding page. Sampling, very important. Saturation sampling for me, the best way. In other words, everybody gets a questionnaire and it's easier to get a representative sample if you have a saturation sample. So if everybody can complete, but eventually when you look at the results, you say, well, it is representative of the organization or not.
And let me just jump in. If it's not, you can always weight the data afterwards so that it, again, matches what your population actually looks like.
Yeah, okay, thank you for that. And this is a very interesting table on, it was developed by Gardner, and this to give you an indication of what is if this is a population sample, the number of respondents that you need to get a 5% margin of error and a 95% confidence level. It is a bit crude, but at least it will give you an indication of how many people how many respondents you need. What is very important, for instance, if you need if you need, for instance, hundreds, let me see here, 169 respondents, you will probably need to have a saturation sample on 300 to get that. Because not all the people will answer the questionnaire. So don't think that you only need to send to 169. That would not be representative. Quantitative results, look at the modus, the mean, the median. It will tell you different stories, but remember always the essence is you want to prove that your project made an impact on a business need. And that is what the questions you ask will determine the answers you get. And so you need to ask the questions that will show that you made an impact on the business imperative. Otherwise, you're wasting time and money. Observations for me is one of those things that's often neglected as a measurement. If you use, for instance, if you have a town hall session and you would use different observers looking at different blocks in this town hall and see when people start disengaging. And because, as Angela said, we want this message to get through to the people. But if they disengage after 10 minutes, we must ask, why did it happen? So we will change the presentation, we will change the content, we will change various things and see if it goes better the next time. And then see if the people actually get the message. So use observations in town halls. It is very valuable. Also, when you have specific communication messages, displayed in a factory, for instance, or at a mine. See if people actually stop and take notes, or they just pass by you. They don't even take care, look one moment at your communication. Then ask yourself, what should you change? If this is the way that you decided that this message should be spread, look at the way that you're communicating it. Look at the way that you display it, the number of words, etc. Then content analysis, very important. Readability indices. You cannot have content written for operational level people at engineer level. So do your readability index. Make sure that the people actually understand the content, and that you present it in a visual way that it's easier for people with a lower level of understanding.
And the readability index, by the way, is something that can be done using Microsoft Word. You just have to turn the feature on, and then when you do the spell and grammar check, it'll tell you what the reading grade level is.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's as easy as that. Angela, tell us about calculating the ROI, because this is very important.
You can't always do this, but if your campaign has a behavior change as the result, almost any behavior change will have a financial value. It'll either reduce the operating costs of the organization or increase its revenue. So the formula for ROI is very, very simple. It just takes two numbers. One is the gain to the organization. In other words, what was the benefit of this behavior change? The amount of extra money that you're making now per year, or the cost savings you have per year. The cost is the cost of your communication. And so this would include hard dollar costs for videos or print collateral, or the time of people in meetings, or your own time. So you just need those two numbers. And when you plug it into this formula, it'll give you the ROI. Now, on the next slide, there's only one problem with this, is that very often communicators are part of a group of people trying to achieve the same business objective. Like you might be trying to reduce accidents, and so is HR. So sometimes we can take 100% credit for something if nobody else was trying to do anything to achieve that business goal. On the other hand, when we have multiple parts of the organization working on this, or if there's things happening in the outside marketplace, we need to isolate our contribution to that ROI. So three relatively simple ways. One is a survey question that literally asks people, to what extent did you pay more attention to this type of safe working behavior because of the communication campaign? And so you can start getting a percentage credit that you can take for different types of behavior changes. Another is, instead of trying a new campaign everywhere all at once, try it first in some pilot locations that are very similar demographically to your control group locations. And if you find that the behavior changes to a greater extent in your pilot locations than it did in the control groups, you take credit for that difference, how much better it went in your pilot locations. And the final way is by timing. So if you can have somebody like from operations or HR tracking the behavior change that you're trying to work on, and then you know the dates in which you had the town hall meeting, or you launched an email, or you put out a poster campaign. On those dates, you can see if there's been a spike in the change in that behavior, and you can take credit for those spikes. So three simple, practical ways that you can identify your contribution to calculating that ROI.
And if you really want to impress management, this is the way to go. Presenting your results. Angela.
So just a couple of tips. We are communicators, and we shouldn't be frightened by getting these numbers that we get after we do SurveyMonkey or something like that. The next slide, please. Right. So what I typically recommend is use percentages. Amanda mentioned you can use means, modus. All those things are concepts, they're mathematical concepts. But when you use a percentage, it's people. And then we can even imagine it. You know, if it's over 50%, that's more than half of the people. And I typically, if you have a 5-point scale, you might have like strongly agree and agree. I add those two together and then just show those. And then it's important to organize them. A lot of times people just report on survey questions in the exact same order in which they appeared on the survey. Well, that's a meaningless sequence. But if you put it from best to worst, all of a sudden you're starting to tell a story a little bit better. Another thing that helps with a story is a color. So we typically think of red as danger and green as good. I typically use blue though for good rather than green, because there are a lot of people who are red-green colorblind and cannot tell the difference, but they can tell the difference between blue and red. So those are just some of those tips. Another tip is if you've got a group of people and the total results add up to 100%, that's a good time to use a pie chart, because a pie is a whole pie. And then when you segment it, you show this is what percentage of the total this represents. But don't use a pie chart if people could choose like multiple choices. If there's a list of 7 things and they can choose their top 3, a pie chart is the wrong way to present it.
Yeah.
That's better to just show it bar after bar after bar to see what is it that most people chose, what was the second most often chosen.
To close, remember, it must be aligned to Section 3. And the results must indicate how your campaign or intervention addressed the business problem. That is the key. That's the asset question. You must use credible methods. And please do not include the whole research report in your document, in your work sample. Use the numbers in your work plan. So what Angela referred to, the percentages, and then you have a specific section in your work sample where you refer to your evaluation, your measurement. And I personally prefer to cross-reference that the people can see, well, this is actually also in my work sample, and use visuals, present it in a visual way. Don't write long essays about the research. Tell us how you measure it and show us the results. And output results can be used, but as we've said time and time again, outcomes are the biggest, the most important part.